That's the question everyone in the AG markets is asking. Deal or no deal? As headlines flip daily over a potential Trump-Xi meeting, soybean traders are bracing for impact. Could this uncertainty open new opportunities or close the window for U.S. exporters altogether? I'm Johanna Botta, and here to help us make sense of all this back and forth and what it could mean for global grain markets, I'm joined by Bertrand Oesterle, VP of Clearing and Execution Sales at StoneX. Welcome, Bertrand.
Good morning.
So let's start with all this back and forth between Trump and Xi. First, we have a meeting, then we have no meeting, then we're back to having a meeting again. How are the markets preparing for both possibilities?
So you're very right. It's been a chaos rhetoric from Trump once again, and it's been on two fronts. So first of all, there's a meeting, there's no meeting, there might be a meeting. If there's no meeting, it's 155% of extra tax. China being accused of not playing the game, purposely not buying US soybean, and therefore the US are going to stop looking at China cooking oil. So a lot of very heavy headlines which have made soybean go up, down, up, down, up, down. So it creates a lot of volatility. At this stage, we still don't know, meeting or no meeting. We'll find out by the 31st and the 31st of October, 1st of November. If the meeting takes place, then everyone will be glued to their newswire to see if there's any headline coming up.
Yeah.
It could be that Trump could kick the can down the road even further. If there's no meeting at the end of this month, it might be next year when he's supposed to go and visit China. The other bit that is interesting is that while we have that chaos rhetoric about meeting or no meeting, we also have chaos rhetoric about farmer help or not. So yesterday Trump was saying, I'm going to set aside $3 billion to help farmers, and that's outside of the 10 to 15 billion bailout that we've been talking to.
Yeah.
So still very chaotic. But then when we look at the facts are pretty grim. First of all, the funds are estimated to have cut their positions in wheat, corn, soybean pre-potential meeting because there's so much uncertainty. So that short has slightly reduced. It's only a guess because obviously we don't have a government in the US. So we're in the dark. There's no CFTC, but the market feels that the specs have reduced. Also, when we look at the Chinese data, it's not good for the US. So the September figures, which we had mentioned previously, were 12.87 million tons. That's the amount of soybean that China has bought in September. That was a record for September. There was no US soybean in those 12.87 million tons. No September origin from the US is the first time in 7 years. Last year, for example, it was 1.17 million tons. Now, actually 1.7 million tons. When we look at the composition of the imports, it's 10.96 million tons of Brazilian, 1.17 million tons of Argentine. The message is China doesn't need the US, it can rely on South America.
Right.
So that makes things pretty complicated for Trump at present. Then the other thing that we have to consider is the message that comes back from China. China is defiant. China is saying, well, if you try to put extra fees on our boats, we'll do the same. So it's still a tit-for-tat reaction. And then when we look at the US are 73% harvested. Again, that's an estimate because we don't have the USDA figures because of the government shutdown, but it's almost 3/4 through. And the US market needs to find an out for this crop.
Right.
And for the moment, we're being told by our US colleagues that it's mostly going to storage, it's not going to exports. And the only thing that is saving the farmers at present is a good domestic demand in the US, with the unpack crush figures, for example, for September being really high.
Okay. So even if we get a best case scenario and we get a deal in early November, is it too late for US exporters anyway?
There's two elements to consider. First of all, the Chinese have been giving us some information recently, which may provide some hope for US exporters, in the sense that Chinese importers have been saying very recently that Brazilian prices are too high. They've also indicated that they're not fully covered in terms of shipment for December, January. So there might be a window of opportunity. But at the same time, the Chinese government came back to say, if we have a shortfall, we have reserves that we could release onto our domestic market. So there might be an element of demand, but the Chinese government might have a solution not to have to turn to the US. Okay. The second bit is Brazil. So Brazil is planting very fast. The soybean crop is already 24% planted compared to 9% at the same time last year. That means that the quicker they plant, the quicker presumably the crop is going to grow, the earliest it's going to be harvested. So come January, there might be more Brazilian soybean available to be harvested and to come to the market, providing that La Nina doesn't ruin that growth process.
Right.
So what does it mean? It means that US exporters, if there is a deal, will have a very short window of November, December shipment, and that could be very tight.
It almost sounds like China is like extending an olive branch in a weird way by letting that data come out. Let's move on to corn now. Any recent developments there?
So if I start again with China, we've had some very mixed messages from China. So the corn harvest is going on, and we've had some mixed messages in terms of it's rained too much, it's delaying the harvest, it's a problem, especially in Huanghui region. I hope I'm pronouncing this well. It's quite a large area of China, and that was initially a concern. Since then, we've had the Statistics Bureau saying that overall it's going to be a good crop despite the weather issues there and there. And we've had some confirmation as well from the Agricultural Ministry saying that they think it's a good crop, therefore imports from China would be 6 million tons, less than the 7 million tons they had anticipated previously. Then if we look elsewhere, the Argentine are already 30% planted. The crop is still expecting to be large, 61 million tons. That would be way more than last year on a switch from oilseeds to corn. And that again is going to be dependent on whether or not La Nina comes to create some problems or not. Okay. Then the first Brazilian corn crop is also being planted pretty well. It's past the halfway mark. It's 51% planted so far. And then when we look at the US, we are 59% harvested. Again, that's an estimate from outside the USDA because we've got the government shutdown. But it is being harvested at good pace. And the question mark we have out of the US, and I think that's the most important element at present to look at in terms of corn, is the yields. There's been a lot of noise, a lot of discussions about lower yields than initially anticipated out of the US. And it's going to be interesting when the USDA comes back on to see if they straight away go and make that survey to find out where the yields are, if they're going to correct it or not. So all eyes would be on the USDA coming back on the US yield estimates.
When it comes back, because we don't know. We're still on day 20-something. Okay, so let's move on to wheat now. Euronext Paris wheat has been under some pressure. What's driving that move?
So there's been a few elements there. First of all, if we look at demand, there's been some optimism for France when October from Egypt bought an additional 2 cargoes of French wheat. But the disaster in inverted commas for France is the fact that Morocco has been stating that they are looking at Argentina as an origin. And that's at a time when Algeria is tendering, but it's not buying French. Okay. So the usual French export markets for the moment are reduced to just Egypt. So that's the first element of pressure. The second part of pressure, which is not just on Euronext, but also on Chicago, Minneapolis, and Kansas, is we've had plenty of news, which is more to the downside than to the upside. So for example, if we look at Argentina, we look at a set of production estimates recently from the Buenos Aires Grain Exchange and the Rosario Grain Exchange at 23 million tons. It's a very good crop. If we look at Australia, we had a very recent LSEG survey that puts the crop at 35.7 million tons. That would be the third largest production on record if realized. And then in terms of planting, the US are estimated to be about 75% planted for winter wheat. Again, it's a private estimate. It's another USDA estimate because the USDA is not there, but it's still 3/4 through. Similarly, the Ukrainians are 72.1% planted, according to the Agricultural Ministry. So there's a lot of good data on wheat around. And on top of it, there's Russia. So the Russian Agricultural Ministry came in to say that the old crop is 90 million tons. It's quite a high estimate, and it's been somehow comforted by private estimates, with ICAR coming in at 88 million tons and Sovecon coming in at 87.8 million tons.
So those last numbers, I mean, they sound pretty strong. Haven't we been getting mixed messaging coming out of Russia?
So beyond the production, there's been some mixed messages indeed from Russia, and it's mostly from the agricultural ministry.
Okay.
So we've had some data from Russia over the past 2 weeks stating that the new crop area might be lower by 6% winter and spring. 6% when you consider a 90-ish million ton old crop, that means 5 million tons less.
Right.
So it's quite significant. Also, we've had talk of dryness, drought, La Nina, and so on. So that also could be a bit supportive. And then the thing that didn't make sense from Russia recently is the agricultural ministry saying that from February to June, they're going to look at an export quota which is similar to maybe a touch above last year. Last year was 10.90 something million tons. So if we say maybe it's going to be close to 11 million tons, it doesn't really make sense when we look at the first quarter wheat exports out of Russia for this season, which were about a third lower than the previous season. If you haven't exported much at the start of the season, you expect that the exports are going to pick up for the rest of the season. But if the quota for the end tail of the season is tight, then when are you going to export? So the only potential would be to export in the second quarter of the season, which is at the time when the logistics are being made more difficult by winter.
Okay. And one last thing before we let you go. You often mention the December-March spread on Paris wheat. Are there any developments there?
It's been the feast of all discussions over the past 2 weeks. I've discussed deck March with so many people, and there are so many opinions. So it's becoming very much in focus because we've had a big shift in open interest. So when I started to talk to you about deck March in this setup, it was because the December open interest had gone up to 406,000 lots. This morning we were 305,000 lots, so we've lost about 101,000 lots, and people are starting to ask questions. Is it some of the trade getting out? Is it the funds getting out? And when we look at the fund report from the Euronext COT last week, we lost 15,000 lots. This week, we've lost about 40,000 lots of open interest, and people are saying, are the funds already starting to roll? So 4 o'clock today, UK time, we're going to have an update of the Euronext COT report. If the figure from the fund position goes from minus 293,000 lots to minus 253,000 lots, that's the answer. It's a fund roll. If it's any less, then it is trade and fund potentially. So people have been really much trying to guess if the fund roll for some of the funds is starting early or not. What is the normal time for the roll? 17th of December, we've got the option expiry. So normally from the 3rd of November to the 20th of November is the time when the fund roll would be expected. What has deck March done recently? It's rallied to minus 125. So we're already quite high compared to where we would normally be pre-roll. So that's where all the discussions have started to come about. People are saying, where is this deck March going? And expectations are wide. Some people are saying, minus 1.25, minus 1.5. I'm happy to get out. It's much better than previous seasons. I'll just get out. I'll shut my eyes. I don't look at it anymore. Others think that we're going to parity. Others think we're going to +2, +5, +8, +12 for some. So the reason why people think that deck March could rally is because they look at what SepDec has done. So September, December into the fund roll went from minus 725 to plus 325. We gained 10.5 euros, and then it collapsed back down to minus 18. So people are saying, considering we have 305,000 lots of open interest in December still, and the SepDec moved with about the same amount of open interest on September, we could see a similar activity on the deck March. Again, it's very speculative, but a lot of people think that we could see a 10 euro move, and it's going to be interesting to see around the 3rd of November where that OI is and where the spec position is, especially the fund position is, to find out where we start from that deck March fund roll. And then the other question that people have asked is, are the funds going to get out or roll? The reason why they're asking, the specs had been telling us for months that in their mind, the euro would remain strong. Therefore, they would have an incentive to stay into the roll. But the euro has weakened recently because of the French political debacle. So we're not around the 120 mark. We're more around the 115 mark or anywhere in between. And that is maybe an incentive for some of the specs and the funds in particular to have lightened up the position in Paris wheat, especially at a time when we expect them to have gone lighter on their short in Chicago because of the potential Trump meeting that may or may not occur.
So lots of things to be watching in early November. Bertrand, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to our viewers for watching. For more financial content, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.